Hey there, listeners. In this ever-evolving world, the call for change really resonates everywhere, from business to government to our personal lives. But there's this interesting paradox, or this interesting sort of thing that sort of sits there, and that fact is, while that we are wanting and we like the idea of improvement, embracing personal change often is met with resistance. So in this episode today, we're going to explore the dynamics behind this and offer strategies to make change more accepting and effective. Let's discuss.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Welcome to the Ask Dennis episode. This is a freestyle episode where I'm asked a question by our listeners, or I share my thoughts, experiences, and insights from working with many leaders around the globe. As I said in my opening, in this ever-evolving world, there is a call for change, and it's almost universal, right? So I'm talking about it through businesses, governments, and also in our personal lives. Now, everyone loves the idea of improvement. But when it comes to embracing change personally, many of us hesitate. It reminds me of a cartoon where I've seen somebody standing on stage talking to a large group of people and said, put your hands up if you think we need to change, or we want change. And everyone puts their hands up. Great. Excellent. Now put your hand up if you want to change. And all these hands go down. No one wants to change. It's quite interesting, the whole dynamic. So in today's episode, we're going to dive a little bit deeper and around the dynamics, in fact, more psychological dynamics, or the way we think, the way we're wired. But behind this, there are some strategies that we can actually pull together to really make change more accepting and more effective. Now, the appeal of change, what we know is that change inherently it is attractive because it promises progress, opportunities. Really, it's the engine behind innovation, social reforms, personal breakthroughs. Now, it also offers exciting potential for maybe a better future, or solving some problems, or unlocking new opportunities. Now, change is really like the hero, if I can put it that way, of our personal stories of success and growth. We actually see this in films and in the movies, whereby there's the hero story and the things, the change, the hard times they went through, but how they changed and then how they moved forward to be successful and how they grew. Now, there's a hesitation to change. Now, despite the apparent or the obvious benefits, personal change is sometimes met with resistance. People push back. There's an understanding of why we can help each other or ourselves overcome these barriers is some things I want to talk about right now. And some of the reasons that we might hesitate are following. Number one is the fear of unknown. Change pushes us out of our comfort zones, and it moves us into what we call uncharted territories or waters, places we've never been before, possibly. And it's natural to really prefer that familiar circumstances or the way things are currently, no matter how imperfect or how not so good they are, over that uncertainty of what change brings. So what do I mean by this? Is that sometimes we will settle for the way things are today, even though they may not be right. They may not be perfect. There might be something wrong. We will like to go and do that versus going out into those uncharted waters, or that uncertainty, that ambiguity that change may bring. The second area is why you may hesitate, is the loss of control. Change can make us feel that we're not in the driver's seat anymore. The loss of control can be disorienting, it can be uncomfortable, and it makes the status quo seem once again more appealing. The identity threat, this is another area which is quite interesting. Our habits and our routines and the things that we do really start to define who we are. Now, if you start moving these along or changing these, we're starting to feel like, or we may start feeling like, that we are losing part of our identity, which then starts to become quite daunting for some people. Or another example I wanted to give you actually is somewhere whereby people are being made redundant, as an example. Their whole identity has been around that role or around that organization. And now they're out of that organization. There's a threat to their identity. They feel like they're not wanted anymore, or they don't even know who they are anymore, which is not true. The feeling is true, but the fact that's their identity is not true. Their identity is that they're a person and they could be skillful in a whole lot of other things. But your title or the organization is not you. That doesn't make you. That's not your identity. Number 4, effort over comfort. Quite an interesting one, this one. For change to happen, it's really going to force you or ask you, or you need to put effort and energy and commitment and resource that are sometimes hard to bring together. So you may have to try and go out and search or find them, find the right person, find the right tools. And it's not always easy. Then you've got these existing habits and comforts of routine, as I said before, and they are powerful forces that you might want to start thinking about. Actually, I want to maintain the current state. I've talked about the areas of why we might hesitate. And as I said before, I want to talk to you about how we might be able to overcome some of these barriers. The wording I want to use here is the inner conflict. What's going on inside of you, in between your ears, maybe in your mind or in the way you think or just overall. Inner conflict occurs when there's a clash between what you believe and the new information or experiences you are having. Now, for many, that conflict is uncomfortable and can really lead to 2 outcomes, actually. You can reject that new information or experiences, or you can change your belief. And so there's those 2 different sort of outcomes if there is a conflict and you're starting to feel uncomfortable. Now, in personal transformation or change, the easier path is often to ignore the need for change rather than to engage with the challenge process of changing. So sometimes people will just turn off, heads in the sand, don't want to know about the change because they don't want to go through that challenge process of changing, and so they tend to ignore it. The inner conflict is massive. There's a lot that goes on for all of us in the way that we think and the way that we look at things, the perspectives. So it's very interesting. Now, some strategies for effective change is that understanding and addressing really that internal resistance that you may have to change can really start to pave the way for successful personal and organizational change or transformation. So how do we bridge the gap between wanting that change and then starting to implement it? Okay, so that's what we're going to go through here. Number 1 is educational empowerment, enhancing the awareness about the benefits of change, and then also the dangers of stagnation. In other words, standing still, because if you do nothing, if you take no action, if you do nothing with the change and you stand still, that's what we call stagnation. What happens is you tend to go backwards. And so because of that danger of stagnation, that can actually motivate people to embrace change. The next area is around small steps. If you can break the change into smaller, manageable actions, that can start to help mitigate the fear of the unknown and make the change process seem less overwhelming. Number 3, support networks. Building support systems through peers, mentors, or any professional help that you can tap into can start to help alleviate feelings of losing control and that identity threat that I talked about before. Number 4 is really around recognition of progress. If you can celebrate small victories along the way, that's really going to start to boost your morale. It's going to boost the morale of the team, the organization, and it's going to really encourage people to keep on going on the journey towards change. Very important that we start to think about how can we recognize the path or the journey of progress. Number 5 is empowering autonomy. allowing individuals to have their say in the change process can decrease the feelings of helplessness or not the ability to have their say or have their voice heard and things like that. So if you can give people the autonomy and allow them to have their say during the change process, what I see is that it starts to increase engagement. What do I mean by this? There's a saying out there that I use, which is the best thing since sliced bread. And when we talk about that, it is when those who've got children, they show people their children are the best children. But I tell you what, it's the same as when a leader says an idea, people go, they're the leader. But when people within the team come up with these ideas, that's when they start to buy into it. Why? Because it's their ideas, right? That's where we're getting them to have their say, getting them to buy into it. It's smart leadership if you can do that, for sure. Look, if you can understand why people desire change and resist it, then that sort of tends to start to give you quite valuable insights into humans and our behaviors and our psychology and the way that we think and we do things. And if you can start to do that, it's great, because by leveraging this understanding with the strategic approaches I've just talked about, then we can start to effectively foster growth and development that change tends to promise. As author John C. Maxwell would say, change is just not necessary, it's inevitable. Change is the thing that we know in life that is constant, and it's going to keep going on. So the key is to lead it effectively, making the journey as rewarding as the destination. That journey, the ability to go on that journey and change, is very important. So I know, listeners, that at times we want change and we want improvement, but sometimes we come up against resistance from people or ourselves. And so today's episode was just to really give you a little bit of an understanding on things to recognize or look out for, but also some things that you can do to help things along a bit. Hey, your call to action this week is to download the 10 ways to lead in today's world. Go into the show notes and you'll actually see the actual link for this. This is where you can review the document that we've got, which is around the 10 main themes and 42 strategic insights as a result of us or myself actually interviewing hundreds of leaders around the world around the topic of leadership and change and the mindset and executive excellence and personal well-being. And what I'd like you to do is just have a look at that and think about where or understand where you stand with each of the different themes and the strategic insights. Understand where you are today with these items, and then what are some things you might need to put in place to help you grow and strengthen some of those areas. Hey listeners, that's it for this episode. It's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for joining me on the Leadership is Changing podcast. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.